whatever it might be, you know. And I'm getting older and I have a family of my own. And
Three?
You know, I have 3 and 1 on the way.
From a young age, Ricky was thrust into the spotlight, appearing on his family's show. His charm and good looks made him an instant favorite with audiences, but still something you may never know about him. This video will uncover the story of a pioneering rock and roll star and teenage heartthrob, Ricky Nelson. Curious? Let's get started now. Ricky Nelson was born Eric Hilliard Nelson on May 8, 1940 in Teaneck, New Jersey. Growing up in a showbiz family, Ricky's parents, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, were already household names through their radio and television show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Ricky Nelson was the Nelsons' younger son, and they also had an older son named David, who would go on to become a well-known actor in the future. Ricky Nelson was the daughter of the Nelsons. During the time when Ozzie Nelson was on tour with the Nelson Orchestra, his wife Harriet, who frequently acted as the band's vocalist, remained in Englewood, New Jersey, to care for their 2 small children, Ricky, who had just been born, and David, who reached the age of 2 at the time. Eventually, the family settled down in Tenafly, New Jersey, where they eventually bought a colonial house that had 2 stories. This was the place where they established their home. On the other hand, their stay was short since they relocated to Hollywood not long after Ozzie and Harriet were scheduled to make an appearance on the radio show The Raleigh Cigarette Hour, which was hosted by Red Skelton during the 1941 to 1942 musical season. This was during the time that the musical season was in progress. During the entirety of this time period, Ricky's grandma on his father's side in Tenafly continued to provide him with care and support. 2 floors tall, the Nelsons acquired a Cape Cod colonial home in Los Angeles in November of 1941. The residence was located in the city of Los Angeles. It didn't take long for this house to become their permanent residence. To begin their new life together on the West Coast, Ricky moved to Los Angeles in 1942 to be with his parents and brother. This event marked the beginning of their new routine. The commencement of their union was marked by Ricky's advent into the world. The producer of Red Skelton, John Guadal, characterized Nelson as a child who was not only likable but also withdrawn, introspective, and secretive. Nelson was a difficult young man. This was in spite of the fact that Nelson was of a modest stature and had a significant amount of difficulty and fight with severe asthma. The use of a vaporizer that emitted a tincture of evergreen, which assisted him in managing the nocturnal symptoms of his asthma, allowed him to obtain a better night's sleep, which in turn helped him deal with the symptoms of his asthma. It was around the time that Skelton was being drafted into the military in 1944 that Guadal conceived of the concept for the radio sitcom The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. The show was conceived with Nelson's parents in mind. The first episode of the show aired on October 8, 1944, and it was met with favorable public reception. Ozzie, who subsequently became the show's principal writer, drew inspiration from the real-life hijinks and challenges that his child encountered. These experiences provided a source of inspiration for Ozzie. Dave, who was 12 years old at the time, and Ricky, who was 8 years old, made their first appearance on the show on February 20th, 1949, in the episode titled Invitation to Dinner. This episode marked the beginning of their adventures that were featured on television. Ricky was the youngest of the 2 children. In 1952, the Nelson family made their first appearance on television with the release of the film Here Come the Nelsons. This was done in order to evaluate the appropriateness of a potential television series in the future. Their first excursion into the realm of television was this particular endeavor. The success of the movie convinced Ozzie that they would be able to successfully transition from radio stations to television stations so that they could better serve their audience. After then, on October 3, 1952, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet was originally broadcast on television for the first time. It continued to air until September 3, 1966, when it was ultimately discontinued after almost a decade of operation. The program went on to become one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history thanks to its extended run, which solidified its status in the annals of television history. The Nelson family's career in the entertainment business reached a significant milestone with the accomplishment of this feat. Nelson received his education in a variety of schools located in the Hollywood region, including Gardner Street Public School, Bancroft Junior High, and Hollywood High School, from which he graduated in 1958 with a grade point average of B. During his time in school, Nelson attended a number of colleges and universities. In his later years as an adult, Nelson said that he did not enjoy going to school since he found it tedious, and it was a challenge for him to have to wake up early. This was in spite of the fact that he had achieved tremendous success in his academic pursuits. The athletic skill that he possessed was put on display throughout his time in high school, when he participated in both football and tennis, respectively. Additionally, Nelson and his brothers displayed their athleticism by doing a trapeze act on an episode of Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet titled The Circus in the month of January 1960. This episode was broadcast on the television show, although Nelson's father had urged him to seek additional education. Nelson did not feel that it was necessary for him to attend college. This was despite the fact that Nelson had already achieved a significant level of financial success by the time he was in his high school years. When he was 13 years old, his parents exercised strict supervision over his substantial income, which amounted to more than $100,000 on an annual basis. It was decided to place his profits in trust accounts. In spite of the fact that he was a rich individual, his parents provided him with a $50 allowance when he was 18 years old. When he was in a bad financial condition, he would occasionally resort to imaginative techniques such as collecting and redeeming empty pop bottles in order to afford basic pleasures like going to the movies. He would do this in order to get by. Nelson's interest in music was great while he was in his teens and early teens. He was musically inclined. He was a talented musician who was able to play the clarinet and drums, and he quickly became proficient in the fundamental chords of the guitar. It was via the process of copying his favorite rockabilly musicians from Sun Records that he was able to work on developing his vocal talents. His vocal abilities were usually honed in the privacy of his own bathtub or in the showers at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, where he would routinely exercise such skills. Carl Perkins was one of Nelson's most significant musical inspirations, and he was especially enthralled by Blue Suede Shoes, which was a top 10 hit for Perkins in March of 1956. Nelson was particularly charmed by Blue Suede Shoes. There was an attempt made by Nelson to recreate the sound and tone of the traditional guitar break that was featured in the song. Ricky Nelson, who was just 16 years old at the time, was eager to make a good impression on Diana Osborne, his fiancée, who shared his enthusiasm for Elvis. Diana Osborne was also quite enthusiastic about Elvis. In spite of the fact that he did not have a record deal at the time, he assured her with self-assurance that he, too, would release a record in the near future. The well-known jazz company Verve Records is seeking young and appealing talent that is either capable of singing or can be educated to sing. They are looking for someone who can sing. He was successful in securing a one-record deal with Verve Records with the assistance of his father. Nelson's very first song, which was issued in late April of 1957 and was named A Teenager's Romance, was the first record that he ever published. For the song I'm Walkin', which was performed by Fats Domino, Nelson visited the recording studio on March 26, 1957, and laid down the recordings for the tune. In addition to that, he followed through with the recording of the song You're My One and Only Love at the same session. On April 10, 1957, Nelson made his first appearance in the world of television rock and roll, which served as his introduction to the public before the formal release of the album. While this was going on, he made an unpaid public performance at Hamilton High School in Los Angeles, where he delivered a rendition of Blue Moon of Kentucky, which enthralled the audience. He sang I'm Walkin' while playing the drums in an episode of Ozzie and Harriet titled Ricky the Drummer. Both of these performances took place simultaneously. Together with 4 other preparations, he was there at the location with the purpose of attending a lunch hour gathering. It was abundantly evident that he was going to become famous in the not-too-distant future as a result of the enormous response from the audience, which consisted of yelling at the teens who had attended his performance. As soon as it was released, the single I'm Walkin' shot up to the 4th spot on the bestsellers in stores chart on Billboard. Meanwhile, the song's B-side, A Teenager's Romance, surged to the 2nd spot on the chart. After the summer break of the television series came to an end in 1957, Nelson embarked on his first road tour. During this tour, he went to 4 different state and county fairs in the states of Ohio and Wisconsin, where he performed as the headlining act. At each of the 4 performances, he also served as the opening and closing act. At the beginning of the summer of 1957, Ozzie took action to support his son in his career by withdrawing him from Verve Records due to problems over compensation. This move was taken in order to encourage his son's career. Alternatively, he was successful in getting a lucrative 5-year agreement with Imperial Records, which granted Nelson autonomy over the selection of songs, the artwork for the covers, and other aspects of the production process. This was an alternative to the previous option. The first song that Nelson published under the Imperial label was titled Bebop Baby, and it has earned an astonishing 750,000 advance orders. Additionally, it has surpassed 1 million copies in sales, and it has achieved its greatest place on the charts at number 3. His debut record, which was given the name Ricky and was made available to the general public in October of 1957, was first released. Ahead of the end of the year, it shot straight to the top of the charts in a very short amount of time. Because of these achievements, Nelson's participation on the Ozzy and Harriet show expanded, and he started concluding each show with a musical performance, usually every 2 or 3 episodes. This was made possible by the fact that he was able to do these things. During the summer of 1957, Nelson made a decision that would have a huge influence on his career. He was doing a tour across the states of Ohio and Minnesota at the time. The experience of performing among older jazz and country session players who showed a disdain for rock and roll was causing him to become more and more disillusioned with the music. After some consideration, he came to the realization that he would like to establish his own band with members who were younger than he was. In the beginning, there was James Burton, an electric guitarist who was just 18 years old. He was the first member to join. The band was completed by Gene Garth, who played the piano, Richie Frost, who played the drums, and James Kirkland, who played the bass. They collaborated on their debut track, which was named Believe What You Say and was released in the year. Joe Mathis had previously performed the lead guitar role, and he was responsible for contributing to several of Nelson's early singles, including Bebop Baby, Stood Up, and Waitin' in School, amongst other songs. He was also responsible for adding to Nelson's early discography. During the time when he was recording Poor Little Fool for his second album, Ricky Nelson, which was released in 1958, Nelson initially rejected the notion of releasing the song as a single. In contrast, the song ended up being a big hit, reaching the top of the Hot 100 list on Billboard and selling more than 2 million copies. This was in spite of the fact that he had some reservations about its performance. Within the span of time between 1958 and 1959, Ricky Nelson achieved a level of chart success that was equivalent to that of Elvis Presley. Over the course of that time period, Nelson released a total of 12 singles, but Elvis Presley only released 11 songs over the same time period. Nelson embarked on his first major tour during the summer of 1958, which resulted in huge weekly revenues for the artist. This was in contrast to Elvis Presley, who, because of his military service, was unable to record as much music as he would have loved to have had the opportunity. By the time the year 1960 arrived, the Ricky Nelson International Fan Club had amassed an astonishing 9,000 chapters located in various geographic locations around the globe. One of the most embarrassing and scary incidents in Nelson's career was when supporters attempted to throw themselves beneath his automobile. Nelson described this as one of the most uncomfortable circumstances he had ever encountered in his career. The occurrence of this took place in spite of the fact that Nelson's fame was increasing. Nelson is credited with being the pioneer of a groundbreaking strategy that finally revolutionized the way music is marketed. This method involved using television as a promotional tool for popular albums. When it came to the production of early music videos, his father was the one who was responsible for pioneering the use of editing techniques that were distinctive to the industry. Films like Traveling Man were the ones that offered the most famous examples of these abilities. In spite of the fact that his career was in a state of uncertainty by the year 1967, Nelson remained to be a fixture on television screens. He appeared on illustrious television shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and played a range of roles in shows like The Streets of San Francisco and Quinn Martin's Tales of the Unexpected. He also appeared on a number of other television shows. It was during his guest hosting stint on Saturday Night Live in 1979 that he made a humorous imitation of his television comedy persona by doing a spoof of The Twilight Zone. During this period, he had the opportunity to explore the worlds of a number of other popular sitcoms that aired between the years 1950 and the early 1960s. Even after his appearance on Saturday Night Live, his performance was remembered. Among the notable performers with whom Nelson had collaborated, some of the names that come to mind include James Burton, Joe Osborne, Alan Pulder Harris, Joe Mathis, the Jordanaires, Scotty Moore, and Johnny and Dorsey Burnett. Nelson had worked with these renowned musicians, and he was a talented performer who had collaborated with them. The fact that the music that Nelson recorded had a sound that was crisp and punchy may be attributed, at least in part, to the fact that engineer Bunny Robin and producer Jimmy Haskell were responsible for producing it. The quality of the recordings that Nelson produced may be attributed to the combination of their skills. It was via his successful performances of rockabilly as well as ballads that he was able to display his versatility as an artist over his career. The gentleness of his voice made him particularly well suited to ballads, despite the fact that he enjoyed up-tempo singles such as Believe What You Say, Hello Mary Lou, and Stood Up. His voice was especially well suited to the melody of ballads. Nelson had a great deal of success with songs that topped the charts, such as Traveling Man, Poor Little Fool, and Young World. In addition to other singles, such as A Hey Teenager's Romance, Lonesome Town, and Teenage Idol, which struck a chord with his audience, Nelson had a great deal of success with songs that topped the charts. Because of these songs, Nelson was able to achieve a tremendous lot of renown. In addition to his employment in the music industry, Nelson was also employed in the film and television industries throughout certain periods of his life. During his career, he worked in a variety of fields. He made his debut in the film industry with the picture Here Come the Nelsons, which was released in 1952. This was his first film, it was his second feature, and it was released in 1953. He had an appearance in the film Three Loves. He had a professional career in the film industry. It is believed that the film Rio Bravo, which was released in 1959 and was directed by Howard Hawks, contributed to the success of the picture at the box office, also known as the box office success. Howard Hawks played the role of director for Rio Bravo. In addition, John Wayne and Dean Martin were involved in the production of the film alongside Nelson. Additionally, his portfolio includes the films Love and Kisses, in 1965, which was directed by his father, and The Wackiest Ship in the Army, which was released in 1960 and starred Jack Lemmon. Both of these films were directed by his father. This individual's father was the director of both of these films. Nelson's television credentials are broad and includes appearances as a guest on a wide variety of well-known shows. His credentials include all of these shows. These series include, amongst others, General Electric Theater, McLeod, The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew Mysteries, and The Love Boat. Other programs that fall within this category include. In addition, he demonstrated his flexibility as a musician and actor by taking part in supporting parts in television films such as 3 on a Date and High School USA in the year 1983. These two films were both regarded to be movies that were made for television. Television was used in the making of both of these films by the production company. When Nelson secured a substantial agreement with Decca Records in 1963, it was a pivotal moment in his career since it was the beginning of a 20-year partnership between the two companies. Nelson was engaging in a huge undertaking by signing this contract. The chart career of Nelson experienced a setback during the time that Beatlemania was on the rise, the British invasion was taking place, and the counterculture movement was just getting started. The scenario remained the same throughout Nelson's whole career, despite the fact that he had some initial successes, such as the smash hit song For You in 1964, which ended up reaching number 6 on the charts. Decca was taken aback when they took the decision to keep Nelson on board, which is a clear indication of their confidence in his ability. Nelson is recognized as a pioneer in the American country rock genre as a result of his contributions to the creation of the California sound, which he made in collaboration with other musicians such as Jackson Browne and Linda Ronstadt. Nelson initially became interested in country music in the middle of the 1960s, when the genre was beginning to transform into country music. This was the time when Nelson was first exposed to country music. Although he'd been absent for such a considerable amount of time, he would not make his way back into the top 40 until the year 1970. He rose to prominence with his interpretation of Bob Dylan's song She Belongs to Me, which featured well-known musicians such as Randy Meisner, who would go on to co-found the Eagles, and Tom Brumley, who had previously played the guitar for Buckaroo Steel. These musicians were all members of the Stone Canyon Band at one point or another. Garden Party was the song that Ricky Nelson used to win his final attempt at chart success in the year 1972. It was the tune that he used. A disastrous performance that took place during a Richard Nader Oldies event that was staged in Madison Square Garden served as the impetus for the creation of this song. Nelson wrote the song as a means of conveying his dissatisfaction with the audience's negative response to his new work, which had left him feeling disheartened. He did this by expressing his gratitude to the crowd. The song was written by him as a means of expressing his unhappiness with the situation. Despite the fact that they failed in their prior try, Garden Party was able to attain the highest place on the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart and ascend all the way up to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 list. Both of these accomplishments were accomplished. For its remarkable performance, the track was awarded a gold certification of excellence, which is the highest possible accolade. Nevertheless, his later initiatives under MCA Records, which had bought Decca, were greeted with a variety of outcomes, some of which were positive while others were dreadful or both. Some of these outcomes were beneficial while others were terrible. In the year 1974, Nelson found himself at a crossroads in his career. This occurred at the same time that the Motion Picture Association MCA was attempting to find a career path that was suitable for the actor who had previously been a teen star. In spite of Nelson's efforts to rekindle his musical journey, which included touring with the New Stone Canyon Band, which was created under Lindy Getz's supervision, he was unable to achieve the level of success that he had hoped for with the band when he was performing with them. The Music Corporation of America MCA finally made the decision to terminate the contract of the veteran performer, which signified the conclusion of a very significant milestone in Nelson's musical career. After 7 years had passed since the musician's contract was signed, the ruling was rendered. For the first time in his life, Nelson fell in love with Marianne Gabber in 1957, when he was just 17 years old. This resulted in the two of them developing a personal bond with one another. He appeared in 3 episodes of the television sitcom Ozzie and Harriet, playing the role of Nelson's on-screen lover. Gabber was the actor that played the character. The fact that Nelson and Gabber were both young did not prevent them from experiencing feelings of attraction toward one another during the course of their time together nonetheless. Their relationship did not develop into something more serious during the course of their time together. There was a shift in Nelson's feelings for Lori Collins, a country singer who appeared as a guest on the television show Town Hall Party, which was broadcast on a weekly basis. This occurred throughout the course of the coming year. Collins had just turned 15 years old at that very moment in time. It was Collins who was responsible for introducing Nelson to important individuals like Johnny Cash and Tex Ritter. My Gal Nelson's first song was a collaborative effort between the two of them. The song was recorded and released. Additionally, Collins was the one who acquainted Nelson with the aforementioned musicians. Collins also made a surprise appearance on Ozzie and Harriet when the program was coming to a conclusion when it was finished. She portrayed Ricky's girlfriend and showed the increasing attachment that existed between the two of them through her performance in the role. They were finally prevented from getting married by the concerns of their parents, which put an end to their hopes and aspirations for a future together. It was finally decided that they would not get married, despite the fact that they had considered the possibility of doing so. During the holiday season of 1961, Nelson and Kristen Harmon, who was the daughter of football player Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox, established a romantic connection. Kristen Harmon was the daughter of Tom Harmon and Elise Knox. Tom Harmon and Elise Knox were the parents of Kristen Harmon, who was their daughter. At the time of the wedding, which took place on April 20th, 1963, Chris was an expectant mother carrying a kid. The wedding took place on that day. After some time had passed, the event was referred to as a shotgun wedding. During the year 1963, Chris was given the opportunity to become a regular cast member on the television show that was geared toward families following his acceptance for the cast. They gave their children the names Tracy Christine Nelson, Gunnar Eric Nelson, and Matthew Gray Nelson, who were identical twins, and Sam Hilliard Nelson, who completed their family. All of their children were named after individuals. 3 distinct individuals were honored with the naming of their offspring. In spite of this, by the year 1975, their marriage had already begun to become strained, which ultimately resulted in a divorce that was made public in October of 1977. Chris requested alimony, custody of their children, and a portion of their assets as part of their divorce settlement. Moreover, she insisted that they divide part of their assets among themselves. Even though Chris and her boyfriend were able to temporarily resolve their issues, she made the choice to seek the services of an attorney in order to pursue a permanent separation from her spouse. This decision was taken despite the fact that the issues had been resolved temporarily. Instead of going on tour, she wanted Rick to give up his profession in music and focus on acting instead. The fact that they had different perspectives about Rick's professional life led to the emergence of tensions between them. The tendency that Chris had to drink to excess and spend extravagantly was a contributing factor that made these confrontations even more difficult to manage. Consequently, Rick was required to embark on extensive tours while domestic aid took care of their children. Domestic assistance was provided by others. This was a result of the circumstances that had occurred. Immediately after the divorce was formalized in December of 1982, Rick's financial situation was entirely and utterly destroyed. This was because the legal bills exceeded $1 million, which was the reason for this change. Nelson's first encounter with a person was with Helen Blair, who worked as a part-time model and as a trainer for exotic animals. Vegas was the location where this incident took place. In the year 1980, Nelson and Helen Blair began their romantic connection. This marked the beginning of it. She became his frequent traveling companion almost immediately after that, and in 1982 she finally moved in with him. All of this took place in 1982. It was she who accompanied him at all times. Despite the fact that Blair was Nelson's personal assistant and the one who introduced him to his fan club, she was not warmly accepted by Nelson's family and other acquaintances. This was the case despite the fact that she became his buddy. Despite the fact that he had explored the thought of marrying her, Nelson ultimately came to the conclusion that he would not follow through with the marriage. She, on the other hand, was not addressed at Nelson's burial, despite the fact that she tragically went along with Nelson in the airplane crash. Her name was not stated. Although Nelson's parents had indicated a desire to be buried in the same site, Harriet, Nelson's mother, did not agree with their request to be buried in close proximity to Nelson. This was despite the fact that they had expressed a desire to be buried in the same location. The Blairs were awarded a tiny sum against Nelson's assets in the wrongful death lawsuit that they brought against Nelson. This was due to the fact that Nelson did not include Blair in his will. Nelson did not include Blair in his will, which is the reason for this situation. On the 31st of December 1985, Nelson was traveling from Guntersville, Alabama to Dallas, Texas, where he was due to play on New Year's Eve. Unfortunately, he passed away while he was in a car. Dallas had been chosen as the location for the event to take place. As the plane was on its way into Dallas, the terrible accident occurred. It was during this time that the tragedy occurred. In the tail of the Douglas DC-3 aircraft, there was a malfunctioning heater that caused a catastrophic fire. As a consequence of this fire, the cabin was flooded with hazardous gases, which led to the evacuation of the passengers. The airplane ran into a number of technical problems, which were the underlying cause of each and every one of these troublesome circumstances. As a consequence of the tragic event, Nelson and all 7 passengers on board were discovered to have perished. This was the case despite the fact that both pilots were able to survive the disaster. Due to a misunderstanding that occurred during the process of moving Nelson's remains from Texas to California, the funeral was delayed by a number of days. The mistake occurred during the process of transporting Nelson's remains. When the funeral services were held at the Church of the Hills in Los Angeles on January 6, 1986, there were a total of 250 mourners who entered the building, while 700 admirers gathered outside. The funeral services were held on the day of the funeral. Among the numerous singers, playwrights, and actors that were present at the event were Connie Stevens, Angie Dickinson, and Colonel Tom Parker. Other notable attendees were Colonel Tom Parker. Angie Dickinson and Connie Stevens were 2 members of the audience who were also prominent. The funeral service for Nelson was held in a private ceremony at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, California. The event took place after a period of time had passed. Following a period of time that had elapsed, the incident took place. Ricky Nelson left an indelible mark on the music industry. He was a trailblazer who helped shape rock and roll and paved the way for future generations of musicians. His songs continue to be celebrated and his legacy lives on. Thank you for joining us as we remembered the life and death of Ricky Nelson. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of the musicians who have touched our hearts. See you in the next video.